I've been traveling solo for 3 years now, and I thought I'd seen it all. I've hiked through the Himalayas, gotten lost in the Medinas of Morocco, survived food poisoning in Indonesia, and accidentally wandered into a restricted military zone in Turkey. I'm not reckless, but I'm adventurous. I go where the guidebooks don't. I find the hidden places, the local secrets, the stories that don't make it to Instagram. But what happened to me in Japan 3 days ago has me questioning everything I thought I knew about travel, reality, and my own sanity. My name is Alexandra Alex to everyone who knows me, and I'm 29 years old. I'm a freelance writer and photographer, which is a fancy way of saying I barely make enough money to sustain my travel addiction, but I wouldn't trade this life for anything. I've been in Japan for the past month, my 3rd visit to the country. The first 2 times, I did the typical routes: Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka, Hiroshima. Beautiful, but crowded with tourists doing the exact same thing. This time, I wanted something different. I wanted the Japan that nobody writes about. I'd spent 3 weeks in the countryside, visiting small villages, staying in family-run minchakus, photographing rice fields and mountain temples. It was exactly what I'd been looking for: authentic, peaceful, off the beaten path. That's when I met Kenji. I was in a small town called Nakatsugawa, in the Gifu prefecture, having dinner at a tiny izakaya where I was the only non-Japanese person in the room. The owner, an elderly man who spoke no English, had been incredibly kind, bringing me dish after dish of local specialties and refusing to let me pay full price. Another customer, a man around my age, noticed my struggle with the Japanese menu and came over to help translate. That was Kenji. He was from Tokyo originally but had moved to the area a few years ago to work remotely in tech. He spoke perfect English and was thrilled to meet another person interested in the real Japan. We ended up talking for 3 hours. He told me about hidden onsen, about mountain trails that tourists never found, about festivals in tiny villages that kept traditions alive from centuries ago. I showed him my photographs, and he was genuinely impressed. "You have a good eye," he said. "You see things that most travelers miss. Have you been to Kizo Valley yet?" "Yes, a few days ago. The Nakasendo Trail was incredible." "Did you take the train there?" "Part of it. The JR Chuo line." He leaned in, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "Did you know there's another train route? An old one that most people don't know about." I felt that familiar tingle of excitement. "Tell me more." "It's called the Kizo Shadow Line. It was built in the 1920s as an alternative route through the mountains, but it was abandoned in the 1960s when they built the modern rail system. Most of it is closed, tracks torn up, tunnels sealed. But there's a section maybe 20 kilometers that still runs. Why would they keep a section running if the rest is abandoned?" Kenji shrugged. "For maintenance workers, I think. To access certain areas. Maybe just because bureaucracy is slow and they never officially decommissioned it. I'm not really sure. But I've heard stories from locals that you can still catch a train on that section if you know when and where." "Have you done it?" "No," he admitted. "I've thought about it, but I've always chickened out. It's technically not allowed. You could get in trouble. And the stories about that line are strange." "Strange how?" He hesitated. "Old superstitions, mostly. People say the shadow line passes through places that aren't quite right. That time moves differently there. That people who take it sometimes come back changed. But those are just local legends, the kind of ghost stories every old train line has." I should have listened to that warning. But I didn't. Because I'm an idiot who thinks she's invincible. "How do I find it?" I asked. Kenji looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. "I'll write down the directions. But Alex, seriously, be careful. And if anything feels wrong, just get off the train and walk back to the main line. Don't be stubborn about it." "I'm never stubborn," I lied with a grin. He wrote down instructions on a napkin. A station name I'd never heard of, Kageyama. A time, 11:47 p.m. A platform number, 7 and a warning, don't talk to other passengers. Don't ask questions. Just ride to the end and get off. That was 2 days ago. Yesterday, I followed his directions. Getting to Kageyama station was harder than I expected. It wasn't on Google Maps. It wasn't in any guidebook. I had to take a local JR train to a small town called Midorigawa, then hike about 3 kilometers down an old road that wound through dense forest. My phone's GPS kept glitching, showing me in the middle of nowhere, even when I was clearly following a paved road. I almost turned back twice. But just before sunset, I found it. Kageyama Station was like something out of a ghost story. A single wooden building, old-style architecture, with paint peeling from the walls and kanji characters on a weathered sign. The platform was empty, lit by a single flickering light. There was no ticket machine, no attendant, no other people. I checked my watch, 7:23 p.m. I had 4 hours to wait. I sat on a bench on the platform, eating the konbini and nigiri I'd brought, and tried to convince myself this wasn't insane. I was an experienced traveler. I'd been in weirder situations. This was just an old train station, nothing supernatural about it. As the hours passed, the forest around the station seemed to grow darker, the sounds of crickets and nightbirds becoming almost oppressively loud. My phone's battery was draining faster than it should, dropping from 78% to 41% in the span of an hour, even though I wasn't using it. At 11:30 p.m., I heard it, the distant sound of a train whistle. My heart started pounding. This was real. The train was actually coming. At 11:43 p.m., lights appeared in the distance. An old-style train, the kind I'd only seen in museums, rolled slowly into the station. It was painted a deep burgundy color, with brass fixtures and wooden panels visible through the windows. Steam rose from beneath it, even though it was clearly electric I could hear the hum of motors. The train stopped. The doors opened with a pneumatic hiss. I stood up, slinging my backpack over my shoulder, and stepped aboard. The interior was like stepping back in time. Wooden benches with red velvet cushions. Brass luggage racks. Old-fashioned light fixtures with amber glass that gave everything a warm, sepia-toned glow. It looked like it had been preserved from the 1930s. There were other passengers. Maybe a dozen of them, scattered throughout the car. All Japanese, all dressed in clothing that seemed slightly off, not quite modern, not quite period costumes, but something in between. A woman in a kimono that looked too formal for travel. A man in a suit that was well tailored but in a style I couldn't quite place. A young boy holding a wooden toy I didn't recognize. None of them looked at me. None of them looked at each other. They all stared straight ahead or out the windows, perfectly still. I remembered Kenji's warning, don't talk to other passengers. I found an empty bench near the middle of the car and sat down. The doors closed. The train began to move. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. We rolled through the forest, the darkness outside broken occasionally by small lights in the distance. I could see my reflection in the window, my own face looking back at me, nervous but excited. Then I noticed something odd. The other passengers' reflections didn't quite match their positions. The woman in the kimono was sitting 3 rows ahead of me, but her reflection appeared beside mine. The man in the suit was across the aisle, but his reflection was behind me. I blinked hard, looked away, looked back. The reflections were normal again. I must have been tired, seeing things. The train entered a tunnel. The lights inside the car flickered once, twice, then stabilized. When we emerged, everything had changed. The forest outside was gone. Instead, we were passing through a landscape I couldn't quite comprehend. Buildings that looked like they were half constructed and half deconstructed at the same time, existing in multiple states simultaneously. Roads that curved in impossible directions, looping back on themselves in ways that hurt my eyes to follow. The sky above was the wrong color, not quite night, not quite day, but something in between, a perpetual twilight that shouldn't exist. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. I looked at the other passengers. They hadn't moved. They were still staring ahead, completely unaffected by the impossible landscape rushing past the windows. The train entered another tunnel. This time, when we emerged, the landscape was different again. We were passing through a city, but not any city I recognized. The architecture was a bizarre mix of different eras and styles, traditional Japanese buildings next to Art Deco skyscrapers next to structures that looked almost alien in their geometry. And there were people on the streets, thousands of them, all moving in perfect synchronization like a choreographed dance I didn't understand. My phone buzzed. I looked down. I had a message, but the sender showed as a string of characters I couldn't read, not Japanese, not any language I knew, just symbols that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them. I didn't open the message. The woman in the kimono suddenly stood up. Without looking at anyone, without any expression on her face, she walked to the door at the end of the car. The door opened even though we were still moving. She stepped through. And disappeared. Not like she walked into another car. She just vanished the moment she crossed the threshold. I felt panic rising in my chest. I needed to get off this train. I needed to get back to reality, to the normal world, to anywhere but here. I stood up and moved toward the front of the car, thinking maybe the conductor would be there, maybe there would be someone who could explain what was happening. The man in the suit grabbed my wrist as I passed. His grip was cold. Impossibly cold. Like touching ice. "Sit down," he said in perfect English. "You're not supposed to move around." "Let go of me," I said, trying to pull away. "You're disrupting the pattern," he continued, still not looking at me, still staring straight ahead. "Sit down. Wait for your stop. That's the rule." "What is this place? What's happening?" "You took the shadow line," he said, as if that explained everything. "You chose to get on. Now you have to ride it to the end." I yanked my wrist free and stumbled back to my seat. My heart was racing. My phone was now at 12% battery even though I'd barely used it. The time on the screen kept jumping forward and backward: 11:47 p.m., 2:13 a.m., 9:08 p.m., 6:34 a.m., none of it making sense. The train entered another tunnel. This time, when we emerged, we were in complete darkness. Not nighttime darkness, but the absence of light, of color, of anything. The windows showed nothing. The interior lights were the only thing that existed, our car a bubble of reality floating through void. I don't know how long we traveled through that darkness. It could have been minutes or hours. Time had lost all meaning. My watch had stopped working. My phone was dead. I closed my eyes and tried to calm down. This wasn't real. I was hallucinating. I'd eaten something bad, or I was having a mental breakdown, or this was all a dream. In a moment, I'd wake up in my minchaku, embarrassed that I'd gotten so worked up over some local legend. When I opened my eyes, we were back in normal forest. Regular trees, regular darkness, regular sky with stars above. The train was slowing down. A station appeared ahead. It looked modern, well lit, with digital signs and vending machines visible on the platform. It looked real. The train stopped. The doors opened. "Last stop," a voice announced over the intercom in Japanese. "Please exit the train." I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my backpack and practically ran off the train. The moment my feet hit the platform, I heard the doors close behind me. I turned to look, thinking I'd see the old burgundy train, but there was nothing there. The tracks were empty. No train. No other passengers. Just me standing alone on a platform at what the digital sign identified as Nare Station. I knew that name. Nare was a tourist town on the Nakasendo Trail. I'd been there a week ago. It was about 40 kilometers from where I'd gotten on the shadow line. I checked my belongings. Everything was there: my backpack, my camera, my dead phone. But there was something extra, a ticket stub in my jacket pocket that I didn't remember receiving. It was printed on old-style cardboard with Japanese characters I couldn't fully read, but I could make out a date and time: December 21, 2024, 11:47 p.m., and December 22, 2024, 2:17 a.m. According to the station clock, it was 2:17 a.m. I'd been on that train for 2.5 hours. It had felt like both minutes and days simultaneously. I found a 24-hour cafe near the station and used their Wi-Fi to charge my phone and try to make sense of what had happened. I searched for information about the Kizo Shadow Line. There was nothing. No Wikipedia article, no travel blogs, no historical records. It didn't exist. I tried to find Kageyama Station. Nothing. I looked up stories about ghost trains in Japan. I found plenty: the Kukusake Express, the Kaiken Line haunting, urban legends about trains that transport the dead. But nothing that matched what I'd experienced. When my phone had enough charge, I called Kenji. It went to voicemail. I left a rambling message about what had happened, probably sounding completely insane. Then I noticed something on my camera. I'd taken photos earlier in the evening while waiting at Kageyama Station. I scrolled through them. They were all wrong. The photos showed Kageyama Station, but in every single image, there were people. Dozens of them, standing on the platform, all facing away from the camera. They hadn't been there when I took the photos. I'd been completely alone. And in the last photo, the one I'd taken right before the train arrived, there was a figure standing directly behind me. Close enough to touch. I could see it clearly in the image, a woman in an old-style uniform, like a railway attendant from a century ago, her face pale and expressionless. I'd been alone on that platform. I was absolutely certain. I spent the rest of the night in that cafe, too scared to sleep, trying to rationalize what I'd experienced. Maybe it had been a tourist trap, some kind of elaborate haunted house experience. Maybe I'd been drugged, though I couldn't imagine how or why. Maybe I'd had a psychotic break. But the photos were real. The ticket stub was real. The train had been real. At 6 a.m., I went to the local Koban, the police box. I don't know what I expected them to do, but I needed to tell someone official what had happened. The officer on duty, a middle-aged man named Tanaka-san who spoke limited English, listened to my story with an increasingly concerned expression. He made some phone calls. More officers arrived. They asked me to come to the main police station. That's where I am now, writing this from a small room where they've asked me to wait while they investigate my story. They've been kind but clearly skeptical. They think I'm either mentally unstable or making up a story for social media attention. They've called the local hospital to have someone evaluate me. They've also called the nearest consulate to verify my identity and make sure I'm legally in the country. But here's the thing that's making everyone nervous, I'm not the only one. About an hour ago, Tanaka-san came back and told me that they'd found 2 other foreign tourists in the past 6 months who'd reported similar experiences. A German man in August and an Australian woman in October. Both had stories about finding old train stations that didn't exist, taking mysterious trains through impossible landscapes, and emerging hours later with no explanation. Both had photos on their cameras that showed things that shouldn't be there. Both had ticket stubs from a railway line that doesn't officially exist. The police don't know what to make of it. They're treating it as some kind of elaborate prank or maybe a black market tourist trap operating illegally. They're sending officers to the coordinates I gave them for Kageyama Station, though I've told them they probably won't find anything. My phone has been acting strangely since I got off that train. Apps open and close on their own. The time is always slightly off, even when I correct it. And sometimes, just for a second, the screen shows images that I didn't take, platform views from angles I never photographed, faces in crowds I never saw. And then there's the message I finally opened, the one with the strange symbols. When I looked at it this morning, it had changed to English. It said simply, "Thank you for writing the shadow line. You are always welcome to return." There was no sender. No way to reply. When I tried to show it to the police, the message had vanished. I don't know what I experienced on that train. I don't know if it was real in the conventional sense, or if I stumbled into something that exists outside normal reality, or if I'm still somehow not understanding what happened. What I do know is this: there are places in the world that don't follow the rules we think govern reality. There are gaps in the map, spaces between spaces, routes that lead somewhere else. And I found one. The police are telling me I'm free to go. They've verified my identity and determined I'm not a threat to myself or others. They've taken copies of my photos and my ticket stub for their investigation. They've advised me to see a doctor when I return to my home country. Tanaka-san pulled me aside before I left and said something I'll never forget. My grandfather used to work for the railways. He told me stories about the Shadow Line when I was young. He said it was built by engineers who wanted to connect more than just cities, they wanted to connect different versions of the world. He said some trains don't just move through space. They move through the spaces between spaces. Do you believe that? I asked. He shrugged. I believe that there are things in Japan that outsiders don't understand. Things we don't talk about but everyone knows. The Shadow Line is one of them. My advice? Forget you ever found it. Don't go looking for it again. What if it finds me? Then I hope you're ready for where it takes you. I'm leaving Japan today. I've cancelled the rest of my trip. I'm flying back to the States, back to reality, back to the world where trains just go from point A to point B and nothing stranger. But I know I'll never forget what I saw. And part of me, the part that's always looking for the next adventure, the hidden place, the story no one else has found, part of me wants to go back. Part of me wants to find Kageyama Station again and see where the Shadow Line goes if you ride it more than once. But I won't. I can't. Because Kenji was right when he said people who take the Shadow Line come back changed. I feel it. Something shifted inside me during those 2.5 hours. I see things differently now, patterns in chaos, connections that shouldn't exist, doorways in walls where no doorways are. Last night, I was walking past a subway entrance in Tokyo, and just for a moment, I saw the sign change. Instead of reading Tokyo Metro, it read Shadow Line in those same shifting symbols from the message on my phone. I didn't go down. I kept walking. But I saw it. It's still there, still running, still waiting for people curious enough or foolish enough to step aboard. If you're planning to travel to Japan, stick to the tourist routes. Visit the temples, see the cherry blossoms, eat the sushi. Don't go looking for hidden train stations. Don't listen to local legends about railway lines that aren't on any map. And if you're ever standing on a platform alone at night, and an old-fashioned train pulls up even though you didn't see it on any schedule, even though the station isn't listed in any guidebook, don't get on. Just don't. Because some journeys don't have a return ticket. And some destinations aren't meant to be reached.